Hare Krishna, everybody. We are live from Nanda Sutra's house, which I'm not going to tell you what city it's in. So, is it recent? So, we're not live from Nanda Sutra's house in the wilds of the state of Washington, in the forest. So, we're going to have a class about Lord Nrsimha's appearance right now. If everybody can gather round, and I have cartels.
Aditi Sachit, let's come in front here, please.
Okay. Namaste Nrisimha. Namaste Nrisimha. The joy of day. Iranjo Kashi Purvachaha. Shina Chandana Kalai. Nrisimha, Nrisimha, Toya Toya Mita Nrisimha. Nrisimha, Nrisimha. Namatim Sharanam Prapajoy. Kamalabare Nakalam Adita Singh Kalita Divanya Kashipu Dana Savachita Narani Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Ade Jaya Jagadisha Gure Jaya Jagadisha Gure Avakara Kamalavale Nakam Arutsinga Karika Anyakasipu Isavatrika Naravirupa Jaya Hare Jaya Jagadesha Jaya Jagadesha Kama Ramare Nakano Adut Singha Kalita Divanya Kashipu Kalabrenga Isavatrija Narari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Devi Jaya Jagadisha Devi Jaya Jagadisha Devi. Hiranyakashipu, Vrindavan, Isavatita, Nararirupa, Jagatisha, Jai Jagatisha, Madrika, Nararirupa, Jai Jagatisha, Jai Jagatisha, Jai Jagatisha. Savatri Cha Narari Rupa Jai Jagatisha Hare Jai Jagatisha Jai Jagatisha Jai Singh Jai Singh Jai Singh Jai Singh Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravatakacharya Oskatana Sati Shiva His Divine Grace Sabaya Chandana Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananda Goti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shidway Gadadha Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrindikajaya Shri Shri Radhakrishna Go Bhagavata Sayam Kunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Kijai Vrindavanam Kijai Maturadam Kijai Jagadata Swami Kijai Yuvanamai Kijai Shrimati Tulasi Devi Kijai Samaveda Bhakta Vrindikajai Gaur Premananda Hari 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 Bol. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is to Shri Guru and Gauranga, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, the Shiga Bhagavan Ki Jai, Prahlad Maharaj Ki Jai. So, Om Ganat Timadandasya Gananchana Shalakya Chakshur and Medikam. Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, before telling the story about Lord Nrisimha's appearance, I'd like to recite a very interesting series of verses that are from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Madhya 8th chapter, text 6. And some of these verses were composed by Sridhar Swami in his commentary on the 7th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So some of these verses you'll be familiar with. These are glorification of Lord Nrisimha. And we're going to read the translation too. Shri Nrisimha, Jai Nrisimha, Jaya Jai Nrisimha, Paladesha Jaya Padma Mukha Padma Bringa. So all glory is to Nrisimha. All glory is to Nrisimha, who is the Lord of Prahlad Maharaj. And like a honeybee is always engaged in beholding the lotus-like face of the goddess of fortune. Some water here. And Prabhupada comments, The goddess of fortune is always embraced by Lord Nrsimhadev. This is mentioned in the commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam written by the great commentator Srila Sridhara Swami. The following verse was composed by Sridhara Swami in his commentary on the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Vagisha yasya varane lakshmir yasya javakshasi yasyaste vlayai samvittan nrsimham maham bhaje. Lord Nrsimhadev is always assisted by Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and he is always embracing the goddess of fortune to his chest. The Lord is always complete in knowledge within himself. Let us offer obeisances unto Nrsimhadeva. Similarly, in his commentary on the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Sridhar Swami describes Lord Nrsimhadev in this way. Pralada Hridayaladam Bhaktyat Vijavidaranam Sharadindu Ruchim Bande Harindra Vadanam Harim. Let me offer my obeisances unto Lord Nrsimhadeva, who is always enlightening Prahlad Maharaj within his heart, and who always kills the nescience that attacks the devotees. His mercy is distributed like moonshine, and his face is like that of a lion. Let me offer my obeisances unto him again and again. And finally, Madhya 866. Ugropyanugram evayam swabhaktanam rikeshari keshariva swapoktanam anyesham ugravikramaha. Although very ferocious, the lioness is very kind to her cubs. Similarly, although very ferocious to non-devotees like Hiranyakashipu, Lord Nrsimhadev is very, very soft and kind to devotees like Prahlad Maharaj. And now we'll tell the story. So this, of course, is from the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, which has been translated and purported by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. But before reading, I want to talk about the two reasons for the Lord's Advent, Lord Nrsimhadev's Advent. As is the case in every incarnation of the Lord, avatar, there are esoteric reasons and exoteric reasons. And for those of you who don't know what that means reasons that everybody knows about, like Pritranaya Sadhanam Vidishaya Chadushkanam. And esoteric reasons means hidden reasons, his own reasons. So the exoteric reason for Lord Nrsimhadev coming down is to kill Hiranyakashipu. Pretty easy. And kill all of his associates and establish religious principles, protect the devotees, etc. And the esoteric reason is to have a good time. Because, as we'll hear in the story, these two devotees, Jai and Vijay, were cursed to come down. It was the Lord's plan, because whatever the Lord does, his psychology is very simple to analyze. It's always to enjoy. Whatever we do, probably 90% of what we do is because we have to do it. Or we choose to do it because, we have some other purpose in mind. So, but the Lord doesn't have to do anything. He is aptakama. Whatever he wants, he gets without asking anyone. Whatever I want, I ask and I still don't get. Even disciple, what is that called? Submissive disciples is an oxymoron. That means oxymoron, for those you don't know what it means, doesn't mean someone is stupid and full of oxygen. It means it's a contradiction in terms, like cold hot or something like that. So, hot ice or something.
So there's no such thing as a submissive disciple.
Well, I'm just saying that. At least that's my experience in this world. So, anyway, but whatever the Lord wants, he's up to come, or whatever he wants, he gets. And because of that, he is Swarat. He doesn't need anyone else. I need so many people. I'm dependent on demigods. I'm dependent on so many people to live, but to speak of carry out Krishna consciousness. So the Lord is independent. So he likes to fight sometimes. just like some of the children, I'm sure you all like to fight. And do you ever fight each other? I'm sure you do. So that enjoyment is there because the enjoyment is there in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he has these indirect rasas. There's the direct rasas, like the parental relationship, conjugal relationship, servantship, and, passive, etc. And the indirect rasas like ghastliness. Ghastliness means yuck, like rivers of blood. That's pretty ghastly. Like Parashuram, he was expert in the ghastly rasa. So ghastliness can shock. Did I cause that to happen? That was sympathetic vibration, yeah. Or that was the phone, or that was the doorbell. So sometimes I say something that something else vibrates. So anyways, there's shock and humor, all these indirect rasas, and the Lord gets a chance to really enjoy them when they're in the material world. However, the Lord doesn't condemn us to be in the material world just so he has demons or people to fight with. There was actually someone, I was just reading this, someone outside of our Krishna conscious movement had the proposal that some souls the Lord ordains to be eternally conditioned, so he has something to do in the material world. There's never any lack of conditioned souls. And those conditioned souls originally were Krishna conscious, and they originally choose to. Yeah, they chose, or not they, we chose. Sorry. We chose to come here. So anyway, so that's the reason for his appearance. Otherwise, his energies and his devotees can carry out the purposes of Paritranaya Sadhanam Vinashaya Chadushkrutam. That can be done by Durga and his pure devotees. So, then we'll talk about, actually I have a lot of topics, I don't know if we're going to get a chance to eat tonight. So, why do we chant in the Shingadev prayers? Well, we chant for several different reasons. We chant for the protection of the movement, we chant for the protection of ourselves, and we also chant so the Lord Nrisimha destroys something in our hearts. What should he destroy in our hearts? The oracles, ventricles, what? The anarthas. So that's why Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave his son, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, gave his son Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur the Shringa mantras for that reason. Because it's very important for the devotees to pray to Lord Nrisimha just to tear out the Hiranyakashipu in our own heart. And it's interesting, in the Bhagavatam it's mentioned that, I'm getting ahead of myself, but anyway, I'll tell the story, that when Lord Nrisimha killed Hiranyakashipu, he tore out his intestines, intestectomy, it's called, technical word. One of the things he did is he tore out the heart and he looked at the heart. This is in the Bhagavatam. Just to see, how could I have lived there in the heart of this person? It's described like that in the Bhagavatam. He actually tore it out. He actually didn't tear it out with his claws. He tore it out with the soft part of his hands so he wouldn't hurt the heart. And he could just look at it for a second. Interesting, isn't it? Because we all have this dirt in the heart. So he's just, Lord Nrisimha, and Krishna is wondering, when is my devotee coming back to me and getting rid of that dirt in the heart? Okay, now we'll get on with the story. Of course, Lord Nrisimha is the fourth incarnation mentioned in the list of incarnations, the Dasha avatars. So, in the beginning of the seventh canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a question posed by Maharaj Parikshit to his guru Shukadeva Goswami. He says, why does the Lord apparently favor certain living entities and not favor other living entities? And Shukadeva Goswami makes the point that the Lord is equal, that whatever the Lord does is good for everyone that he does things to or for. And he illustrates this point by reciting another story or a story within a story, or a conversation within a conversation between Yudhisthira Maharaj and Narada Muni. Because Yudhisthira Maharaj has just seen a particular demon killed. Does anyone know what that demon is? What the demon's name is? His name starts with an S. Shishupal. And he was wondering, why is it that Shishupal, who is so envious of Krishna, got liberation? You know, why did he get liberation? And he was just, so then the Acharya, actually Srila Prabhupada talks about this. He gives a very interesting discussion about how one can be envious of Krishna and actually get liberation. And this is very interesting. I just read this story today. Actually, that's what I spent time doing. He says there's two types of criticism that can be, let's say, focused on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One type is the type like favorable criticism, which the gopis had. The gopis also criticized Krishna. They said, Krishna, you were so cruel. You killed that poor girl, Surpanaka, in your previous incarnation as Lord Ram. And so they criticized him for many different things. You cut off her nose and her ears and other parts of her body. That's favorable. And then there's unfavorable criticism, which is like blasphemy. But even when you're talking about unfavorable criticism, there's two types of unfavorable criticism. One type is arising from absorption in Krishna. And another type is not arising from absorption in Krishna. Let me give you an example. Anyway, the type arising from absorption in Krishna gives liberation, particularly Sayuja Mukti. So that's Shishupal. He was absorbed in Krishna and criticizing Krishna 24 hours a day, but he was thinking of Krishna. But there's another type of blasphemy or criticism of God in which one is not thinking of God. And that type is like Richard Dawkins. Prabhupada doesn't give the example of Richard Dawkins. He gives the Acharya's Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur gives the example of Vena. That Vena was criticizing God and Brahminical culture, but he didn't have a direct conception of who God was, so he wasn't thinking of God. Therefore, he didn't get liberated. So if you're going to criticize God, you should have a conception of him so you can criticize him properly. Not like Richard Dawkins. He doesn't have a conception. So if you're criticizing God directly and you have a conception of what he looks like and what he does, then even though your criticism is really bad for you, you'll be purified of that at the time of death. So somehow or other, think of Krishna. Whatever you have to do, think of Krishna. So anyway, Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur states in his commentary that indirectly this means that if one is thinking with one's emotions about Krishna, that's better than thinking just theoretically about Krishna. In other words, he said it indicates that Raganuga Bhakti is better than Sadhana Bhakti. Better than Vaidhi Bhakti, better than Vaidhi Bhakti. So in other words, one has to fix their mind on Krishna as they're executing devotional practices. So let's go ahead with the story. So then the familiar story in the Bhagavatam is told by Narada Muni to Yudhisthira Maharaj. And he tells the story about the four Kumaras cursing Jai and Vijay, and how Jai and Vijay would become Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, Ravana, Kumbhakarna, Dantavakra, and Shishupal, and eventually, he doesn't say this, but we know Jagai and Madai. So, as soon as they were born, there was darkness in the whole universe, and the first demon, the Adi demon to fight the Supreme Personality of Godhead, was Hiranyaksha. And Hiranyaksha was killed by who? Does any of the children know? Yes. Varaha. Yeah, Varaha. What does Varaha look like? A boar. What's a boar? That's good. It's not a boring person. It's a big pig with horn, and they're very ferocious. They can kill people. So, anyway, so after that, Hiranyakashipu, his brother, got really, really upset with this whole thing. He said, I'm going to kill the Supreme Personality of Godhead by, first of all, getting rid of all the Brahmanas and the demigods who worship him. But before he did that, he wanted to preach to his relatives who were crying over the death of Hiranyaksha. So there, in the Bhagavatam, we find Hiranyakashipu preaching Bhagavad Gita philosophy. And he preaches in such a nice way that it practically sounds like a Bhagavatam class or a Bhagavad Gita class given by an ISKCON devotee. He tells a story. Yeah, Hiranyakashipu actually knows the philosophy. So he was a Vedic demon. So what he said, the story he tells is that once upon a time, there was a king, and his name was Suyagna. And this king died. And this king had many wives. That's not permitted in Kali Yuga. But anyway, he had many, sorry about that. He had many wives, and the wives were all crying. But there was a problem with the wives crying. Actually, I'll tell you something interesting about wives crying. That usually women are not permitted in the crematorium. Did you know that in Indian culture? Yeah. Why? Because they cry. So I was at a funeral. This had nothing to do with Lord Nrisimha, but it's an interesting story anyway. I was at a funeral one time, and they let the women in the crematorium. So I had a whole group of devotees. We were chanting the holy names during the cremation, and the women started crying so loudly. The men kicked me out of there, wouldn't let me have a kirtan during the cremation. And I was thinking, how inauspicious this is. You can't have a kirtan during the cremation. So anyway, so these ladies, getting back to the story, the ladies were crying, wailing, not just crying, wailing. And they wouldn't let the body go to the crematorium. And so Yamaraj was getting upset because the body is supposed to be cremated before the sun sets the next day. I don't know if any of you know that. Nowadays, of course, they have the system where they put the body in the refrigerator until all the relatives fly in from all around the world. You ever heard of that before? It's nonsense. According to the Vedic culture, whoever's there has to be cremated before the sun sets the next day. So anyway, so Yamaraj was very upset because they weren't following the Vedic culture. And so he came to preach to them. And how did he preach? He took the form of a very young boy. And as a young boy, he told them a story. He said, once upon a time, my dear wives of the king, there was once a Kulinga bird who was married to a Kulingi female bird. Somehow or other in the Vedic times, the birds got married. I don't know how, but they had some sort of Swayamvara ceremony. So anyway, so they got the two birds were married, and a hunter shot, with an arrow, the female bird. And so the male bird was beside himself. He was crying and rubbing his hands on his. No, it wasn't. He was flapping his wings or whatever. And he was crying, and he was so depressed. And while he was depressed, the hunter noticed he was depressed and said, boy, here's another victim for me. And he shot the second bird. So the moral of the story is that we should become detached to this material world, first of all. And just as we're alive, take advantage of whatever time we have to engage in Dharma and Krishna conscious activities. Very important story. So Yamaraj told the story, and this story was told by Hiranyakashipu to his relatives so that they would feel better about losing Hiranyaksha. So then Hiranyakashipu began to engage in his severe austerities in order to get the power to do what he wanted to do. And what he wanted to do was be in charge of the whole universe. So we know the story that he stood on his tippy toes, and eventually an anthill, the ants ate all the flesh in his body. He was living within the marrow of his bones, or within the center of his bones, and fire was coming from his head, scorching the whole universe. And then the demigods went to Lord Brahma and said, "You got to do something about this." Lord Brahma said, "Okay." And Lord Brahma came and he sprinkled Hiranyakashipu, at least the bones that were remaining, with the water from his kamandalu. And then Hiranyakashipu rose up with a handsome body, a young body, a strong body, and asked for benediction. But it's interesting, most of the devotees, when they tell the story, they tell the story in such a way that it appears that Hiranyakashipu first asked for the benediction to be immortal, but he didn't. According to the Bhagavatam, he understood that Lord Brahma couldn't give immortality. So he arranged, or tried to arrange, to get a trick method of getting immortality. And we know the story that he asked not to be killed in the day or night, or any man or beast or heavenly person or by any weapon. And so all these different ways he requested Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma granted them. And it's interesting that whenever Lord Brahma grants a benediction to demons, it predicts the way that that particular demon is going to die. There's a story told in the Mahabharata about that. There were these two demons, Sunda and Upasunda, and they were brothers, and they were extremely powerful. They also performed austerities to Lord Brahma, and Lord Brahma said, "What do you want?" And they asked, in this case, they asked for immortality, and Lord Brahma said, "I can't give it to you, but you can ask for something else." And they said, "Well, we request that the only way that we will die is if we kill each other." And they were brothers; they really loved each other. Just like, your children wouldn't kill each other, would they? Maybe. You don't know about that. Okay. So forget about that example. But these are two brothers who loved each other. So they were thinking, we'll never kill each other, so we have immortality in an indirect way. So what Lord Brahma did, he was very tricky. He called for Vishwakarma. And he asked Vishwakarma to assemble the most beautiful girl ever from all the beautiful pieces of the universe. This is genetic engineering. Like they have the scientists have this device called CRISPR. Anyone's heard of that before? Where they can manipulate the genes. This is something new for them, but the great devotees in the universe, like Lord Brahma, they already knew how to manipulate the genes. And the Vishwakarma especially. So he got the perfect nose, perfect ears, perfect eyes, perfect head, perfect hair, everything else, perfect. Okay. And so this girl was called Tilotama, means topmost sesame seed. Well, somehow or other, in the ancient times, if someone really loved their wife, they would call her my little sesame seed. I don't know if they do that anymore in India. Do they?
We call it Methi seed now.
There was a Methi seed. Anyway, that was considered very romantic, my little sesame seed. So she was called the topmost sesame seed. Tilo tutuma. Tilo. So anyway, and she was sent on a mission by Lord Brahma, but first of all, she got the blessings of the rest of the demigods by circumambulating them. And she was so beautiful that demigods grew heads on the back of their bodies just to see her, and eyes on the back of their bodies. So anyway, to make a long story short, she goes to visit these two demons, Sunda and Upasunda, who at the same time were drunk. So she goes and says hello, or whatever. And the two demons started to fight each other over her, and they killed each other. So when Lord Brahma gives that sort of benediction to demons, the benediction predicts how they can be killed somehow or other. You'll find that in the case of Hiranyakashipu. So anyway, so after this demon, Hiranyakashipu, got those blessings from Lord Brahma, he became so powerful that he took over the heavenly planets. And all the demigods were serving him, except for, of course, Shiva and Brahma. And Vishnu is not a demigod, so that doesn't count. And so he was getting drunk in the heavenly planets, enjoying the society girls. But the problem is that he didn't control 6 things in the whole universe. There were 6 things he couldn't control. What were the 6 things? The senses and the mind. Manasashtani, Indriyani, Prakriti, Karship. So anyway, so because of that, he met with destruction later on when he offended his son Prahlad Maharaj, because the worst thing that anyone can do is offend a pure devotee. So Hiranyakashipu eventually, he already had 4 sons, because the 4 sons of who Prahlad was the best, or had been given birth to by his wife Kayadu before, while he was doing austerities. Anyway, so from Prahlad Maharaj, let's talk about Prahlad Maharaj. From early childhood, he was very much disinterested in playful things. He didn't play games, he didn't do any nonsense, he just was absorbed in Krishna consciousness. And so, of course, in the movement, we used to have an unrealistic expectation about the children who were born in the movement. We were thinking they'd be the same way as Prahlad Maharaj. Were any of the children here the same way as Prahlad Maharaj when they were here? No, they're not. Listen, I remember thinking like that when I first joined the movement. I saw people having children, devotees having children. I thought, wow, there'd be like little Prahlad Maharajas or little Radharanis or something like that. It wasn't like that. Actually, one interesting story from my own early Krishna consciousness is that I was assigned the duty of being a teacher when I was in the movement 6 months or a year without any training. Mother Irmela didn't train me at that particular time. She wasn't in the movement. You weren't in the movement then, 1972? No. So anyway, so I was assigned the duty, and I thought I was given 5 children to take care of 24 hours a day. And I was only 21 years old. I thought they're just like Kunta children, you know. They're just going to be like little angels. But I discovered it wasn't like that. But yeah, it was too much. So anyway, so Prahlad Maharaj was different. It was different than most children. And so anyway, so Prahlad Maharaj was sent to school, and his school was called the Asurakula, where he was taught by Sanda and Amarka, the sons of Shukracharya, and he was taught about how to be a good king. Specifically, he was taught about how to deal with enemies, different methodologies of dealing with enemies and different methodologies of dealing with friends. And so as far as enemies are concerned, there were different steps that one would take with an enemy. The first one is what's called sweet words. Like if you have an enemy, you go to the enemy and say, "Oh, you're so nice. I really like you." And then the next one after that would be bribery. If you have an enemy, like a business competitor, you just pay him off. And the next one would be you give someone a high position. Like if someone else in the temple, if you're in the temple and they're interfering with your plans, you make them vice president or something like that. What is Chanakapanta to say? Keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. So, and then the next one is called divide and conquer, beta. And if that doesn't work, use threats. And if that doesn't work, argumentum ad baculum, use the stick. So anyway, so Prahlad Maharaj didn't like this very much at all because he was a devotee. A devotee is, one of the qualities a devotee has is a jata shatrava. He doesn't have any enemies, or his enemy is never born. Like we find the description in the Bhagavatam. Titikshava kurunika surada sarvadehinam jata satrava shanta sarva sadabhushna. A devotee never considers someone to be his enemy, although others may consider the devotee to be their enemy. But a devotee, no. He loves everyone. Yastu sarvani bhutani atmana ivanu pashati sarva bhuteshu chatmanam datona vigigupshate, as the Upanishad states. So, therefore, Prahlad Maharaj rejected this sort of instruction. And when he went to see his father, he came back from the Gurukula or Surukula for a few minutes, and he sat on the lap of his father, and his father was very affectionate. He said, "What is the best thing that you've learned in the Gurukula?" And then he basically told his father to head for the hills, would be too attached. And his father got very upset. This is Prahlad Maharaj's quote. Prahlad Maharaj said, "O best of the Asuras, king of the demons, as far as I've learned from my spiritual master, any person who has accepted a temporary body and temporary household life is certainly embarrassed by anxiety because of having fallen in a dark well where there is no water but only suffering. One should give up this position and go to the forest. More clearly, one should go to Vrindavan where only Krishna consciousness is prevalent," because that's Prabhupada's purport to it, "and should take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead." That's from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th canto, 5th chapter, 5th text. And of course, I couldn't imagine Hiranyakashipu in Vrindavan. You think about it. So then Hiranyakashipu chastises the teachers. What are you teaching them? And then he says, and they say, "It's not our fault. Some Vaishnava must have snuck in here to give him association." So he sends Prahlad Maharaj back to school, and the teachers chastise him. And the teachers try to find out where he got his information from. But he doesn't reveal that Narada Muni is his guru at this particular point, which is interesting. He says, basically, one is Krishna consciousness is attracted to Krishna just like iron filings are attracted to a magnet. And they keep threatening him, but then they eventually bring him back to the father, thinking this time they've actually accomplished something. And then the father asks, that's Hiranyakashipu asks, again, "What have you learned in school?" And Prahlad Maharaj replies with this famous verse, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam, about the 9 processes of devotional service. And then he says to his father, another famous verse, Matirna Krishna Patatos Vato Vavato Vitpadyeta Grahad Vatanam, Ananda Gopir Vishatam Tamacham, Punak Punas Char Vita Char Vatanam. That even with good association, rascals like you, Dad, they're not going to become Krishna conscious. They're always going to be engaged they can enter into ignorance and always be engaged in chewing the chew. And the example I use of that is that if someone has some chewing gum and they chew it out, there's no more sugar left. It's not so tasty anymore. That's the material world. And he also gives there's another verse. Oh, yeah. Natevatu Swarta Gatimhi Vishnu Darashaya Yavayarata Manina. That those who don't want Krishna, then they're like blind people that are being led by other blind people. So at this point, Hiranyakashipu gets so angry that he says, "We got to kill this guy." And he sends his associates, the demons, to try to chop Prahlad Maharaj up, put him under the feet of elephants, and put him in a pit of vipers, throw him off a hill, give him poison, wind, fire. And there's this whole story of Holika, which I haven't read in the Bhagavatam, but it's a traditional story, where his sister actually has this benediction. Some of you may have heard the story. His sister has this benediction, she'll never be hurt by fire. So Hiranyakashipu says, you hold little Prahlad Maharaj and sit on a pyre and see what happens. And she gets burned instead of Prahlad Maharaj. Yeah, so it's black magic. But she had the benediction from Agni, according to the story I heard. Then, poor Hiranyakashipu, being frustrated at this point, sends Prahlad back to school. And at this point, Prahlad has gotten so bold that he teaches the children about Krishna consciousness. And the children, they object. They say, look, we're just kids. And Prahlad Maharaj replies to them right now. He says, you're giving the excuse you're just kids. Later on, you're going to say we're teenagers. I'm just paraphrasing. Later on, you're going to say you're married. Later on, you're going to say you got to work a job. Later on, you say you're retired. You're too old. You'll always have excuses. Plus, you're going to sleep 50% of the time. So better to start now. Komara matiret pragyo dharmam bhagavang durlabha manasa janma tadav dhruvam artadam. That is, you should start Krishna consciousness from the very, you must, acharet, that's imperative, from the time you're little kids. Because durlabha manasa janma, it's very difficult, rare, to get a human birth. And so the children asked Prahlad Maharaj, where did you learn about all these things? And then he tells the story of his spiritual master. And that story, of course, is when Hiranyakashipu was engaged in austerity, standing on his tiptoes. The demigods grabbed Kayadu, his mother, while Prahlad was in the womb, and they were getting ready to hold her captive and kill Prahlad when he was born. Narada Muni interceded and said there's actually a great devotee in the womb of Kayadu. Narada Muni took Kayadu to his ashram in Nardakund, which is right near Govardhan, and spoke Krishna consciousness to Kayadu, and Prahlad Maharaj heard it in the womb. And in this way, Narada Muni, by telling the story to Yudhisthira Maharaj, was impressing upon Yudhisthira Maharaj the importance of good association. As we learned from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, was it Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Shastrakoi, Lavamatru Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Siddhi Hoy. By good association, one can get all perfection, even if that good association is only for an instant. So the children become converted, they start chanting, the teachers come into the classroom, and they get really upset. They take Prahlad Maharaj to his father. His father, Hiranyakashipu, asks him, where do you get your power from? And famous retort, the same place you do, God, Dad, from God. And then Hiranyakashipu asks, where is that God? And Prahlad Maharaj says, Sarvatra, he's everywhere. And Hiranyakashipu says, is he in the pillar? And Prahlad Maharaj says, yes, by the way. And Hiranyakashipu hits the pillar. It's described here with his fist in the Bhagavatam. Lord Nrisimha comes out and he plays with Hiranyakashipu. As I mentioned before, the esoteric reason for Lord Nrisimha's appearance is to have fun. So it's just like a cat. I don't know if any of you ever had a cat when you were young. I did. We had many animals. And the cat would sometimes bring a rat back or a bird back. And he would let the bird go or let the rat go. And then he would catch it, bring it back, let it go again. He was having a good time playing with the rat and with the bird. So we don't suggest that for devotees. But anyway, Lord Nrisimha was having a good time playing with Hiranyakashipu. And eventually he puts Hiranyakashipu in the doorway and he kills him with his nails, which are not a weapon. And he tears out the intestines. And I mentioned he examines the heart to see where he was in, like that. And then he kills thousands and thousands of Hiranyakashipu's followers. And he sits on the throne of Hiranyakashipu. In this way, he engages Hiranyakashipu in devotional service. And the demigods, being very much afraid, don't know what to do. They offer prayers. There's a whole section of the Bhagavatam where they offer prayers, but they're offering prayers from a distance, not from close up, because they're frightened. Finally, they'd send Prahlad Maharaj forward. Prahlad Maharaj sits on the lap of Lord Nrsimhadev, and Lord Nrsimhadev licks him, just like a cat licks its master. This is described in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita. And Prahlad Maharaj offers these wonderful prayers. He says, I'm not afraid of you, Lord Nrsimhadev, but I'm afraid of your Maya. So Prabhupada also said, the problem with you Western boys and girls, and of course that refers also to you Eastern boys and girls here, is that you're not enough afraid of Maya. And Maya comes in different forms. Of course, for those of you from India, that means Bollywood movies, which are perverted reflections of Krishna's pastimes with the gopis. Have you ever seen a Bollywood movie? Yes, I'm sure you have. It's usually someone, let's say, dancing with a whole bunch of girls in the Bombay railway station or something like that. That was a Slumdog Millionaire. If you ever saw that movie. You ever seen that? No. Right in the middle of the Bombay railway station, you know, they're having a Rasa Leela with girls. Anyway. So that's a perverted reflection. So Maya comes in different forms, in different types of music, different things that we see, different types, if we eat food not cooked by devotees. This is the way that Maya, the three modes of nature, come and take us over. Because the material world is basically the three modes of nature are active, and that's it. You know, of course, Krishna's in the heart, the spirit souls are there, but the three modes are controlling everything. Nahi kaschit shanamapi jatatishtati karmakrit, as described by Krishna in the Gita. So, anyway, Prahlad Maharaj says he's afraid of Maya, and then, very interesting, he says, gives his gratitude to his spiritual master. He doesn't think, oh, now that I'm with Krishna, I don't need Guru anymore. He says, I am the servant of my spiritual master. Let me serve him. He's praying to the Lord. And he said, I'm also very much concerned with these fools and rascals. And he describes that he has great love for all living entities. In other words, he has no enemies. He loves everyone. And he defines his relationship with Lord Nrsimhadev as a servant. And he says to Lord Nrsimhadev, other than that, we have no other relationship. And Lord Nrsimhadev says, I give you a benediction and an order. You should enjoy in Krishna consciousness. Enjoy, you should become the king of the demons during this whole cycle of Manus, this Manu, particular Manu. And then he says to Prahlad Maharaj, ask for benediction. And Prahlad Maharaj famously says, I'm not a merchant, I'm Baniya. Right? And Prahlad then says, but I do want to request something. I don't want to have any more material desires. And remember, Prahlad Maharaj is a pure devotee, but he's humble. He thinks he has material desires. In fact, he doesn't have material desires. So if you ever find a devotee, who says, I don't have any more material desires, that devotee's in trouble. Because just by his saying that, he's shown that he's prideful. Because why would someone say that to others, even if he has no material desires? So Lord Nrsimhadev orders him to enjoy, as I mentioned before, and then Prahlad Maharaj prays, please forgive my father. And Lord Nrsimhadev says, therefore, 21 generations of your family will be liberated. Not only 21 generations of your family in this lifetime, but 21 past birth families. Pretty cool. 21 generations, horizontal, vertical, pretty interesting. And of course, this is something we always told the devotees to tell their parents when they joined the Krishna consciousness movement, when their parents wanted to take them away. Because I remember my mother, she definitely wanted to take me back. She she had people calling me and telling me that she was dying because I joined the Hare Krishna movement. And I just thought, no, if she dies, she'll be thinking of me, go back to God and get liberated. Pretty heartless. Anyway, of course, she's still alive now, 50 years later, at the young age of 92. So she still lives independently. So, but anyway, it was something that devotees always use to basically not listen to their parents. If we're doing the best thing for you, maybe you don't appreciate right now, but you're all going to get liberated. So then Lord Nrsimhadev says that from now on, I promise I will not kill any of your descendants. And actually, that was very useful because the great-grandson of Prahlad Maharaj was Manasura. And so Krishna, of course, did an armectomy of him. He cut off a lot of arms and only left him with 4 arms, but he didn't kill him. And then Bali Maharaj was a grandson of Prahlad Maharaj. So, and anyway, so this is a story. Let's see, is there anything else I want to add about this? So there are many stories from the Chaitanya Charitamrita about devotees taking shelter of Lord Nrsimhadev. There's one story about Advaita Acharya chanting the Lord Nrsimhadev when his son collapsed during the kirtan. So we can pray to Lord Nrsimhadev to protect someone, to protect our children, protect ourselves. Sometimes devotees say to me that we should only pray for pure devotional service. But I think it's better to be honest with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You know, Akama, Mokshakama, Sarvakama Dharadita, Tivrena Bhakti Yogena, Yajeta Purusham Param. Whether you're free of material desires, full of material desires, or desires of liberation, just go to Krishna. I'm not proposing that Krishna we go to Krishna, ask for a new mobile phone or a new computer or anything like that, but the things that are dear to our heart, that are important to us. And I'll tell you one story about myself that appears like it's just material. About 6 months ago, I was having a terrible toothache, and I didn't want to go to the dentist. So I prayed to Krishna. What can I say? I have to reveal how much Maya I'm in. So I prayed to Krishna. I said, Krishna, help this toothache. I was in a place where there were no dentists anyway. So I prayed, Krishna, help, please. I can't stand it because I couldn't think clearly because when the tooth aches, it really aches. And so 5 minutes later, I walk into someone's house and he says, I have a clove for you. I said, clove, what's that for? And he says, for a toothache. So Krishna, I could see Krishna research. So I took the clove, and since then I haven't been bothered by a toothache. So that's one instance where a rascal like myself prayed to Krishna for something. So I could serve him. Not so I could enjoy my body. So I could serve him. So it's not, we shouldn't be so guilty about admitting our particular position in Krishna consciousness and revealing our mind to Krishna and asking Krishna for something that helps us serve him. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's another story of how there was a fisherman who would always chant the Nrisimha mantra, but in a particular case, it didn't help him with someone who he thought was a ghost. And that was Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya had entered into the sea, and the devotees were looking for him. He had floated down because of the current in the sea near Jagannath Puri. And the fisherman had caught Lord Chaitanya, and he thought he was a ghost, and the fisherman kept chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, and he started to chant the Nrsimhadev mantra to protect himself from Lord Chaitanya, because he thought Lord Chaitanya was a ghost, and it didn't work. So eventually, that fisherman was discovered by Swarup Damodar Goswami, Lord Chaitanya's associate, who was looking for Lord Chaitanya. And he said to the fisherman, he said, I'm a famous exorcist. I can cure you. So he slapped the fisherman. He said, now let's see where the ghost is. And there he found Lord Chaitanya. That's in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So anyway, so these are some stories about Lord Nrsimhadev, Prahlad Maharaj. The main point I want to make is that we can pray to Lord Nrsimhadev for, not to relieve from toothaches. I went to Krishna for that one. But anyway, we can pray to Lord Nrsimhadev for protecting people we love, protecting the world, protecting the spiritual master, protecting the Krishna consciousness movement, and especially for protecting us from Maya and helping eradicate the dirty things in our heart. So, any questions or comments? Yes, Vijay.
There's also the story in Chaitanya Charitamrita of the Kazi.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was when, so the Kazi wanted to stop Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's kirtan performances, so they had a drum broken. And then that night, the Kazi had a dream, and Lord Nrsimhadev actually sat on his chest and took his nails to the chest, didn't rip him open completely. And he revealed that to Lord Chaitanya. And the Lord Nrsimhadev said, if you ever touch any of my devotees anymore, I'll kill all you, whatever, people of a particular religion. Because I can't say it's politically incorrect right now. I'll kill you all. Killed all you milechas, he said. So Lord Nrsimhadev protects the devotees. However, of course, sometimes people say, well, I got it, Lord Nrsimhadev's name, and he didn't protect me in particular circumstances. Well, it has to be something deep. It's not just you chant his name. You have to connect emotionally, spiritually, with the heart. Like the chanting of Hare Krishna, for example, is not simply the movement of the lips and the tongue. It has to be chanted with the heart. I mean, of course, there is benefit of chanting, Namavas chanting, of course. But the real benefit comes, the real connection comes when we're connected with Krishna in our heart, in our mind, in our soul, as we're chanting Krishna's holy names. So if you want Lord Nrsimhadev's protection, it's not just like some magic mantra that you chant, Nrsimhadev, Nrsimhadev. You actually have to be connected to it. And Prahlad Maharaj was very much connected to Lord Nrsimhadev in the heart. So, any questions or comments? Other questions or comments? Mother Irma? Let's have a question. You were interesting questions. Yes? Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes.
So I kind of know what kind of answer I'm going to get, but I just want to ask anyways.
Oh.
I could ask what place in the world has no dentist. That was. Where in the world were you where there were no dentists?
No modern dentist, go over now. Yeah, I don't like fertility. I don't like dentists anyway. Yeah, when I was young. Yeah, what's the question?
So you mentioned earlier in the class that when you're doing things, think about Krishna, you usually get a good result. But what if you do something like you murder somebody and you're thinking about Krishna, thinking that I'm liberating, I'm removing some bad person from the world, like a criminal or something. That you might think that's wrong.
I'm talking about the point mentioned by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is that when you're blaspheming Krishna and thinking directly about Krishna, not about killing some guy in the world, then you're liberated from that offense of blasphemy. He said that specific case, not that you do something bad and you think about Krishna. That's actually an offense on chanting, which doesn't work. One of the offenses on chanting is the offenses in Krishna just commit sinful activities in the strength of chanting. So it doesn't work. Krishna knows better. But if one is concentrating just on Krishna, so the whole point is somehow or other concentrate on Krishna. If you can't do it out of love, do it out of hate. But concentrate, but know who you're concentrating on. The point I was making, that was made by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that if you're not absorbed in Krishna when you're criticizing God, in other words, if you have no idea of who God is, such as Richard Dawkins, my good friend, or Vena. Vena was against God, against Vedic culture, but he wasn't concentrating on God. Whereas Shishupala was concentrating so deeply upon Krishna, he was basically going through every single conceivable way that he could criticize Krishna. So he must have known Krishna like inside and out. He must have studied Krishna's life, with his heart and soul. So if you can do that, you should probably get away with everything. So, yes.
I gotta ask,
Oh,
these activities of these demons
yeah.
seem just totally incomprehensible how these people could be liberated souls. We're told that they are.
Yeah.
So how do we know whether somebody's a liberated soul and they're covered by Maya?
Well, which demons are you talking about right now?
The three.
Oh, Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha and Shishupala Dantapakra. How do we know if they're actually, from the Bhagavatam, we know if they're actually, well, that they're devotees acting as demons?
Right, but we only know that because of Bhagavatam.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I've heard so many times that, well, we can't judge somebody like this because we don't know the past, present, and future.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we're looking at somebody and we're saying, this is somebody that I really don't want to associate with, or somebody that I really don't want to take instruction from, how do we know what? I mean, obviously, Hiranyakashipu is not very good association. I think Hiranyakashipu is not very good association either. Ravana.
No, we take instruction, you just said it already, because she was giving us a good Bible.
Yeah, in a certain circumstance. Yeah, you can take nectar even from a filthy place.
So what did he know?
But
That?
the basic thing is don't criticize someone, ad hominem attack. Criticize what someone says, and because of that, you stay away from them. But we should not engage in personal attacks of people.
Anybody.
Not anybody. Not anybody. I mean, certain people we can say they're acting as demons. Actually, for practical purposes, sometimes we have to do that. But generally, we should not be hating people. We can criticize what a person says, what a person does, but it's better not. But we shouldn't hate people. Not even who? The Grinch. What's the Grinch? Who stole Christmas? Yeah. So no, I mean because this is one of the things I teach in my empathic communication courses, is that people are acting to fulfill certain needs, and they just don't know the right strategy to fill that particular or those particular needs. Yes.
So I was thinking about how you said, well, how we all know that Indra kidnapped God and was going to kill the baby.
Yeah.
Because he thought it was going to be a demon. How did anybody think that was okay?
To kill the baby? The demon seed, as they say. Somehow or other, he was thinking this is going to be a bigger demon than Hiranyakashipu.
Without actually knowing?
He was thinking. I have not spoken to Indra about it, what his reason was, but, anyway, he was thinking genetically, somehow or other, this baby's going to be a bigger demon. Maybe he was going to let the baby grow up first, under controlled circumstances. I don't know. I don't know what he had planned, but they definitely didn't want to let that kid go, one way or the other. What? The golden child.
What about the other sons of Hiranyakashipu?
Samlad and the other ones.
Yeah, because you were talking about how they were, I never thought about that, but why, they were just okay with them, or?
They were okay with what?
They were just.
I don't know.
They felt threatened by the other.
I don't know. I never heard too much about them.
Well, if they all came from Kayadu, then they wouldn't have been
Was Prahlad the oldest?
I don't think so. He wasn't the oldest. No, he wasn't the oldest.
It's not mentioned on it.
It's mentioned that he's not the oldest, actually. He's not the oldest son.
He was being groomed to be the next king.
Yeah, maybe he was the oldest.
Well, because he was the favorite.
Is a favorite, but I heard that the other one, he wasn't the oldest. Anyway, whatever, we have to look into that.
Or it could be that the other kids weren't there, because when they came, most of the demons weren't there.
They had run away.
They ran away.
Because it's described in the Bhagavatam that some of the demons were killed, but the majority ran away.
What she said, I mean, what she asked Maharaj, I feel this way, or I heard that even Indra, or he is a demigod, not demigod, but the king of heaven, right? So
He's a
supposed to
demigod.
be
Indra's a
yeah,
demigod.
he's a demigod. So he's like in a mode of goodness or mode of passion, whatever we call
Yeah.
it. He's on a good side.
But he does a lot of bad
Yeah,
things.
but then again, yeah, he does a lot of bad
Yeah,
things.
man, killing a kid is not the best thing to do.
It kind of tells me that not anybody who is in a position of power and all that would always act in that manner. They would act like Indra killing 2-year-old baby.
Anybody I know?
Well, the good
So-
thing about Indra though is that he was submissive to Narada. So as soon as Narada said
Yeah.
to him, hey, this is not a good idea, this is a mistake, immediately he was.
But, Indra does a lot of nasty things, that he goes to sages' wives and he puts on the guise of being the sage and then has a relationship with the lady, Ahalya, And then as a result of that, he has a little operation done. Might go to Mauritius, And then he has to get a transplant after that. Isn't it? I'm not going to mention it's polite company.
I do have another question.
Yeah.
We were this morning. You started out with that prayer,
Yeah.
and it talks about Lakshmi Devi, love and worship Lakshmi Devi. But then in the Bhagavatam, it says that Lakshmi Devi, before he coming off his prayers to the Lord, never seen that form before.
Yeah. So what's the question?
No, isn't she his eternal consort? How is
Yeah, but there's this thing called Yoga Maya,
it just.
It's Yoga Maya.
She just felt like she never seen it.
Yeah. I mean, because it's, you forget what happened in the past. That's all. Just like the story in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, where Krishna goes to Mathura, apparently goes to Mathura, and then he comes back, and then in another day or two, then he goes to Mathura again, and then he comes back, and the residents don't remember that he's done that. Why is that? It's not that they have Alzheimer's disease or something. You may ask, what is this Yoga Maya that's causing them to forget? And I've realized that they're so much absorbed in the moment of loving Krishna that there's no question of like future or past at that point. It's the real be here now, like that book, 1960s. They're just like, the emotional intensity is so great. Just like if any of you have experienced a really intense emotional feelings, any particular time. Let's say if there's a dangerous situation, you're attacked by a tiger. There's no one cares being attacked by a tiger. But let's say you're in a car accident. You don't think about the future or the past. It's just like right there, what to do with the steering wheel. So when Krishna is relating with his pure devotees, especially in Goloka Vrindavan or any of the pure devotees, they're just so much absorbed in loving Krishna. There's no conception of past or future. It's always the present. Yeah.
When Krishna leaves the gopis, they're all crying because he left.
That's right. And they're just feeling separation. They're just absorbed in that moment of separation. Yeah, I mean, obviously they're thinking that he left, but they're just like absorbed in that separation right then. Yeah, they're still thinking about it. It's just like, it's so intense. It's so intense that they forget to eat. They forget to sleep. They forget their children, everything. I mean, just like when Krishna played his flute, and many of these young girls had little babies. What do? They forgot about their babies. When the wives of the Brahmanas heard that Krishna was hungry, Krishna and Balaram were hungry, what do? They forgot that they had husbands. It's described that when they were bringing all the food to Krishna and Balaram, their husbands are saying, where are you going? And they didn't even reply to their husbands. Of course, this was an apt reaction because their husbands did not reply to the coward boys previously when the coward boys were asking for food for Krishna and Balaram. But it's like that in the spiritual world. You're just so much in love or absorbed in your service that that's all you conceive of. You know, the mood of separation in the now. Even when they're experiencing separation from Krishna, Krishna left Vrindavan, it's in the now that they're experiencing it.
Isn't it true in that story that when they come to Krishna and they, offer all this food, and then Krishna says, okay, thank you very much, go back to your husbands, they say, we don't want to go back to
Yeah, we don't want to go back to it.
They're not devotees. And then the husbands come and they
Well, husbands don't come. They go back to their husbands. Husbands don't come to see Krishna. No. No. Krishna assures them, go back, your husbands will be okay with you. And it's different than the gopis, because when Krishna met the gopis, Krishna said, go back home, and the gopis said no. But the wives of the Brahmanas went back home, and the husbands never came to see Krishna.
They were sorry.
Yeah, they said, husband said, the hell with us being Brahmanas, the hell with our position in society. It's from the Krishna book. But they still didn't go to see Krishna because they were afraid of Kamsa. Whereas the gopis, the wives of the Brahmanas, they went to see Krishna. And not that they were afraid of Kamsa, they were afraid of their husbands previously. I understand. Vedic society. So they're afraid. They were actually there's some statement that they were afraid they were going to get chastised by their husbands if they went back. And Krishna said, don't worry, your husbands will be nice to you. And they were. Yeah. Yeah. Why? Because they wanted to take part in Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. That's why. It's interesting. They wanted to go back to God and they wanted to be with Lord Chaitanya. And they got special mercy. Because normally they're just, I couldn't say just, normally they're standing there all the time and if I could, they're just guarding. Which is kind of nice. I wouldn't object. They're just guarding Vaikuntha so that people like me can't come in. So they wanted to actually experience or understand something a little different, higher, which is Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. And not that they actually changed their relationship with Krishna, became gopis or anything like that. It's just like Narada Muni. Narada Muni definitely goes to Vrindavan, but he's not like an eternal resident of Vrindavan. So he goes to Vrindavan sometimes, or he goes to Dwarka, but he's definitely a Vaikuntha Vasi. So sometimes the devotees in the different abodes, they like to go to different abodes to see what's going on, experience it. What's that?
Narada Muni was cursing devotee anywhere.
Yeah, except for Nardikund. And in Nardikund, well, there's that whole story we always tell when people go to Govardhan about how Narada became Naradi, a gopi. And he was told by Krishna to establish his ashram in Braj. And that's where he took care of Kayadu and also wrote the Narada Bhakti Sutras and the Narada Pancharatra. Yes.
But I have a question. Has there ever been a time where someone who had the Vaikuntha relationship with Vishnu, and they lived in Vaikuntha, they like switched to?
I'm sure there has. One can. One can.
That's mentioned in Nectar Devotion.
Yeah.
No, but it's specifically mentioned in Nectar Devotion that the residents of Vaikuntha can go and become residents of.
Yeah, they can do that. It's not commonly done, but it is done.
I have another question
Yeah.
about Yanaksha and Braha. Did Yanaksha come to Braha to kill the drowned Mother Earth or to kill Braha?
He came to kill Varaha. He wanted to have a good fight. Ranyaksha.
So after the third birth, technically they could have gone back to Vaikuntha and they chose not.
Well, that was somehow or other it was arranged. I mean, that's what the Acharyas say. Somehow or other it was arranged. But that's the same as going back to Godhead to be part of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. I mean, generally, when a devotee becomes perfect in Krishna consciousness, the next life they will take part in Krishna's pastimes to some planet, some universe like that. And even it's described that even if you're not completely 100% perfect, there's several things that can happen. First of all, if you're just starting to advance in devotional service, then you can go to the heavenly planets, next life take birth in a rich family. And if you're very advanced, then you could take birth in a family of transcendentalists, like some of you here. Well, very fortunate. Such a birth is very rare. And I took birth in a molecular family, so not in a family of transcendentalists. And so, in a rich family, probably means I was in the heavenly planets in the last life. So, and then there's another instance is when you're almost like completely Krishna conscious, you can take birth where Krishna's pastimes are taking place, and that's not that final push during the pastimes. And that was mentioned in regard to some of the gopis who were not quite pure. And when they heard Krishna's flute, they were prevented by their husbands to see Krishna. Then they just left their material bodies and went to join Krishna. And that was the final push.
There's actually some other, it's really interesting because like some of the wives of the Brahmanas later on could become gopis in another manifestation. And Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur talks about it in his commentary, Usual in the Light. As some of the wives of the Kurus, when they saw Krishna as queens, they wanted to become Krishna's queens, but they had to wait. So they were in Krishna's pastimes,
right?
But they weren't in their original story. So it's not just the gopis who were in their original story that saw some little thing, but you also have people going there who aren't yet realized in their story, and then we have yet another
birth and another pastime.
Birth in Krishna's pastimes. So they're one birth in Krishna's pastimes
And another birth.
And that to me explains how sometimes we should probably say go back to God and if you're 50% or 75% because you see people in the Krishna's pastimes in the material world
Or yet pure.
Yeah.
Such as the sages in Dandakaranya forest too. Yeah, they went to Lord Ram and said, we'd like to be married to you. And then also what to speak of your friend Surpanaka. She was in Ram's pastimes. The next life, Kuja. She wasn't, obviously Surpanaka, she wasn't pure. She had her issues. But she was, but the whole point that I was making about what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur said, she was absorbed in lust towards Lord Ram. And really, if you read the Ramayana very carefully, you'll see that her whole instigating Ravan to kidnap Sita Devi was because she wanted Ravan to die. Because Ravan had previously killed her husband. You know that story? She was married to the king of the underworld. What does that mean? You know, Australia or something like that.
That's not politically correct.
I know. I better be careful. People from Australia are watching today, so she was married to the king of the underworld, and Ravan went to conquer the underworld, the nether regions. And Ravan killed her husband. And so she hated Ravan from that point forward. That's why Ravan sent her to Janmasthan to get her away. And that's why she knew Ram's power. She had seen Ram kill the 14,000 Rakshasas, Karandusha, and the 14 giants, isn't it? She knew what Ram could do. So she wanted to get even with Ravan. And also, you know, she was in love with Ram. And so because of that, she took birth, because not of wanting to kill Ravan, but because of her being in love with Ram, out of lust, you know, pure unadulterated lust. She actually took birth as Kubja. And Kubja's love was not pure either. But she became purified by being with Krishna. And it's described that when Kubja got her back job done by Krishna, you know, chiropractor, that the first thing Kubja did was she was lustfully pulling on Krishna's dhoti, or not dhoti, clothes. So Krishna, we don't know whether Krishna wore dhoti. So, on his whatever cloth, she was pulling on, said, "Come to my home." And Krishna said, you know, this is, I forget the exact words, but this is for people like us. This is something like, he didn't say vacation, you know, this whatever, a good time or whatever. And then after he killed Kamsa, he went to her home. And on her home, it wasn't exactly the home of the pure devotee of Krishna. I mean, it was like John Lennon's home. You know, he had, John Lennon, you understand what I meant, had like pornographic pictures on his wall. And probably makes a reference to how she had these pictures to incite lust on the wall of her house, right? So she wasn't exactly like really up there in her devotional service, but she got to be with Krishna and she got purified. What?
She had to be patient.
Patient, yeah. Yeah, I mean, next birth.
To a sacrifice for another period.
Well, there were other parts of the body that were cut off too, I'm not going to mention in class too, but, you know, nose, ears, but she sort of needed it. She had a big nose, you know.
She needed trimming.
And Krishna's the original plastic surgeon. So anyway, so Kubja, so she became Kubja and she got a chance to be with Krishna and got purified. So you see so many people getting a chance, even though they're not pure or they have so many desires or whatever, to enter into Krishna's pastimes and they get purified. Amazing. So we have hope for ourselves. And actually we are in Krishna's pastimes. Prabhupada said this ISKCON movement, Krishna consciousness, is part of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. Okay, what happens now? Oh. Prashadam or what?
Both are ready. It's 9:05.
So what should we do? You're the boss.
No matter. Please.
I think we should just eat prashadam.
Why don't we just take Prashadam?
Okay.
Because I've been fasting the whole day. And I don't know which side is up, which side is down right now. Okay, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Nrisimha Bhagavan ki jai.